My name's Francis Flanagan and I'm a Conservation Officer with RSPB in Northern Ireland and Group Facilitator for the Bann Valley Habitat Initiative. I'll be talking to you today about hedgerows, their management and options available through DAERA's environmental farming scheme. Hedgerows have been part of our landscape for over 1,000 years and are one of our most commonly encountered wildlife habitats. The main purpose for the establishment of hedgerows was for managing livestock by creating enclosures and for identifying property boundaries. Here in Northern Ireland, most were planted in the 18th and 19th century. However, some hedgerows are ancient, dating back to medieval times and beyond, and are rich in wildlife and contain remnants of past ancient woodland. Traditionally, these hedgerows would have been managed through laying and coppicing techniques, but today most management is done mechanically. So why are hedgerows so important? Well, in our countryside they can often be the only remaining wildlife habitat in large tracts of intensively managed land. For wildlife they provide vital corridor links through the landscape, provide nest sites for breeding birds, food and foraging resources throughout the year and shelter for wildlife. But hedges have an important role to play in the agricultural landscape and are vital for supporting wildlife that benefits the pollination of our crops and supports the control of pest species. They provide shelter for livestock from the elements, and they benefit biosecurity by preventing nose-to-nose contact from neighbouring herds. They can also act as an important carbon sink for our fight against climate change. Most hedgerows are cut with a mechanical flail, often every year in late summer, early autumn, right through until spring when work stops before the bird breeding season. Cutting regimes substantially alter the structure of hedgerows, their value as wildlife habitats, and often their health. Regular cutting, together with overgrazing and spray drift, can lead to defunct low-value hedgerows that are leggy, gappy and sparse. To get the best from our hedgerows, we should look to maintain a thick, dense hedgerow with a wide bottom and a diverse variety of native shrub species. We should look to provide a variety of heights in our hedgerows, as some wildlife prefer thick, short hedgerows, whilst other species prefer them wide and tall. We should look to coppice and gap up areas of sparse, leggy, defunct hedgerows with native shrub species, and plant or naturally recruit native tree species into our hedgerows where appropriate. Ideally, we should also look to provide a tusky grass buffer at the base of our hedgerow, where wildflower species can be established for added value. There is support for the establishment and management of native hedgerows here in Northern Ireland through the environmental farming scheme. There are wide level options available to all farmers for planting new hedgerows with 2 protective fences, and if you have hedgerows that are suitable, there is also an option for hedge laying with 2 protective fences. These options will improve biodiversity on your farm and strengthen wildlife corridors through the landscape. We should aim not to cut our hedgerows every year. Research has shown that hedges cut on a 3-year cycle produce 2.5 times more flowers than hedges cut every year. This, in turn, leads to increased abundance of pollinating insects, which provide an important food resource for wildlife, as well as pollination for flowers and crops. More flowering shrubs in our hedgerows also means more berries are produced to support farmland birds and mammals throughout the winter period. If cutting on a 2-year cycle, try to cut in late winter rather than autumn, as this produces more berries for the following year. Although overall this frequency has fewer benefits to wildlife than a 3-year cycle. However, it is recognised that some hedges need to be cut annually, particularly roadside hedges for visibility displays, but not all hedgerows need to be cut every year. The timing of cutting is important for hedgerow management. Generally, cutting in late winter has more benefits for wildlife compared to autumn management. This is especially true if cutting on a 2-year cycle, where the timing of management for late winter is critical. Research has shown that there is little advantage regards berry production, abundance of pollinators and flowering shrubs for trimming once every 2 years in autumn. Hedge management in late winter may not be possible due to ground conditions. An alternative is to reduce the intensity of trimming in early autumn and only remove part of the previous year's growth. A lower intensity of cutting, such as only removing part of the previous year's growth, will provide 2 to 3 times more berries for overwintering wildlife compared to a standard cut that removes all the year's previous growth. It is important that we try to produce a mosaic of hedgerow structures across the landscape. Plan a cutting schedule so that not all hedgerows on the farm are managed in the same year. Cutting 1/3 or a half of the hedgerows each year on rotation would have more benefits to farm wildlife. Have a good mix of tall hedgerows, shorter hedgerows and hedgerows with trees across the farm. So in summary, hedgerows are an extremely important resource for farming and wildlife, providing important ecosystem services and connections throughout the landscape. Adapt management practices to achieve a desirable hedgerow structure so that hedgerows are thick, dense and wide at the bottom. Where possible, don't cut hedgerows each year. Manage on a 2-year cycle or ideally on a 3-year cycle for maximum benefits to wildlife. Cut later in winter where ground conditions allow, especially if cutting on a 2-year cycle. Try to reduce the intensity of cutting, especially for autumn cutting, and only remove part of the previous year's growth. Look to produce a mosaic of hedgerow structures across your farm, and where possible, don't manage all the hedgerows in the same year. If you'd like further advice on hedgerow management, on the environmental farming scheme and how to apply, or any aspect of wildlife on your farm, RSPB Northern Ireland are here to help. So please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.